And I felt a little convicted from that, actually, because all that time we spent going through, doing overviews of all these books in the Bible, I really focused on the history of it and the apologetics of it. That would have been his legal heritage. When a person was adopted into a family, they took on the rights of a family member, of being an heir in that family. So I said last week, we're going to be alternating between the book of Psalms and something out of the New Testament. I was having trouble figuring out what book to go to in the New Testament. At one time, Justin was with me. I told Google to give me a random number between 1 and 27, and they came up with 7, which is 1 Corinthians, so I started gearing up towards a sermon out of that. But then halfway through, I meant to pull this quote up for you. Halfway through the week, I came across an old quote that I had shared on Facebook from Charles Spurgeon. And now I'm probably not going to do it justice, but basically it says that I can know all the doctrines of the Bible, but if I don't know Christ, I have nothing. And I felt a little convicted from that, actually, because all that time we spent going through, doing overviews of all these books in the Bible, I really focused on the history of it and the apologetics of it. That's kind of who I am. I love history and apologetics. But I don't think I really portrayed Christ as much as I could have. So what I want to do in the odd week when we're doing the New Testament is I really want to focus on Jesus. So what we're going to do, we're going to start with one of the Gospels. I figure that's the best way is to look at his life. And we're going to go to the Gospel of Luke. So if you guys have a Bible, we're actually going to start in Luke chapter 2 because we just went through Christmas. We spent several weeks talking about his birth. So we're going to pick up right after that. So Luke chapter 2, we're actually going to pick up partway through it. We'll start on verse 21. So Luke 2, verse 21. It says, "On the 8th day, when it was time to circumcise the child, he was named Jesus, the name the angel had given him before he was conceived." The only thing I really want to see out of this, on the 8th day he was circumcised. Jesus is being brought up as a typical Jewish child. Some people wonder, well, why does God have to do this? They forget that Christianity comes out of Judaism, right? We have a lot of our roots in Judaism. So as a typical Jewish boy, he was circumcised on the 8th day. And this is going by a commandment that goes clear back to Abraham. Going to verse 22. And the reason I'm picking Luke to do this out of is he's the only one that talks about this next part. Luke 2:22. "When the time came for the purification rites required by the law of Moses, Joseph and Mary took him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As it is written in the law of the Lord, every firstborn male is to be consecrated to the Lord, and to offer a sacrifice in keeping with what is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of doves or 2 young pigeons." So again, they're doing typical Jewish customs. This would have been at least 40 days after Jesus was born, because Mary couldn't go into the temple because a woman was considered unclean for about 40 days after the child was born. Then she would go to the temple, offer sacrifice, and she'd be ceremonial, ritually clean at that point. When it talks about the pair of doves or 2 young pigeons, this is interesting because the law actually required, for the firstborn male, required the sacrifice of a lamb. We can say, well, Mary brought her own lamb, right? Because Jesus is the lamb of the people. But there was a provision in the law for people who were extremely poor to offer up a pair of birds instead. This tells us that Mary and Joseph were really poor. He was not a wealthy man. We know that he was a builder, he was a laborer. So this also tells us that this was before the Magi came to see them. because the Magi brought gold and all this other expensive stuff. They would have had the money to buy a lamb at that point.
So the three wise men that showed up, did they show up like right after Jesus was born, or was it was later?
It
right?
would have had to have been much later, because the star would have appeared when Jesus was born.
Yeah.
They had to follow it for a while to get there.
Yeah, and they came from the east, so yeah.
There's a lot of discussion amongst the biblical scholars. It has to have been at least after this. It had to have been at least 40 days after he was born. And some put it out as far as 2 years, because when they basically tricked Herod and left, Herod killed every baby that was 2 years and younger. So it had to be somewhere between that 40 days and 2 years. We don't know exactly when. Verse 25. Now there was a man in Jerusalem called Simeon, who was righteous and devout. He was waiting for the consolation of Israel, and the Holy Spirit was on him. It had been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he would not die before he had seen the Lord's Messiah. So the consolation of Israel, this is Jesus coming in to basically fulfill the law. He's coming in to be the final sacrifice for everybody. So we'll all, everybody can have peace with God. That's what the consolation is he's talking about. Verse 27. Moved by the Spirit, he went into the temple courts. When the parents brought the child Jesus to do for him what the custom of the law required, Simeon took him in his arms and praised God, saying, Sovereign Lord, as you have promised, you may now dismiss your servant in peace. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the sight of all nations, a light for revelation to the Gentiles, and the glory of your people Israel. I'm not sure how the customs were back then, but it's kind of strange to me that, a woman would be walking into the courts with a baby and some priests just take the baby and start saying stuff. I do see that sometimes in churches, because you're a close-knit family, so everybody they want the baby time. My wife used to call her baby fix. You get a baby fix by holding somebody else's baby.
We don't do the whole, what do they call it? Consecration of...
There's baby dedications.
Yeah,
which kind of go back to this. We don't really have a biblical precedent for it, but it is basically the same thing with the baby dedication, to where you're basically saying, Lord, I'm going to raise this baby in honor of you, to honor you. It's going to be raised in, with Christian faith and beliefs and all that.
Okay, so on 29, when it says Sovereign Lord, this is Simeon talking to God?
This is Simeon talking. This is actually considered, or called, one of the songs of Jesus' birth. There's a few of them in there. Mary does one, Elizabeth does one, Simeon does one. There's more. But yeah, that's Simeon talking.
To God.
He's actually talking to the family.
Oh, okay.
Well, actually, no, he's talking to God too.
He's talking to God.
Yeah, he's talking to God. So he's praising God. He's holding the baby, praising God.
For Jesus.
Yeah, but the family is there. They see what's going on. And that's something interesting about Luke, is we get a lot of these intimate details that we don't get out of the other Gospels. Remember, Luke was a physician, so he had a very, I don't want to say technical mind, but you know how a doctor thinks when they're looking, they have like a process of going in and getting all the minute details. He was that way, and we see this in his work. It's believed that he probably interviewed Mary when he was writing this to get some of the information that he's got. Verse 33. The child's father and mother marveled at what was said about him. Now it's calling Joseph the father here. And he is the adoptive father. There was an issue that they had, and it goes clear back to King David, when there was a prophecy that the Messiah would come from King David's line and sit on King David's throne. But if you follow the kingly line, it ends at one point, I can't remember the king's name, but basically he gets cursed. It says he will not have another person to sit on the throne. And when we follow one of the genealogies, it comes down through that one man to Joseph. Okay. So when we go through the genealogies, like in Matthew, we see it traced from Abraham down through David down to Joseph. That would have been the legal, his legal heritage. When a person was adopted into a family, they took on the rights of a family member, of being an heir in that family. Biologically, though, he couldn't come from that kingly line because that curse was placed on one of the kings.
But I thought that there was also a lineage to Mary.
There is, and we're going to get in that here maybe today, maybe a little later. We'll see. If not, we'll do it on the next one. And I probably should say this when we talk about the lineage coming down through Mary. But the bloodline still comes from David, but goes through a different path down to Mary. So verse 34, then Simeon blessed them and said to Mary his mother, this child is destined to cause the falling and rising of many in Israel, and to be a sign that will be spoken against, so that the thoughts of many hearts will be revealed, and a sword will pierce your own soul too. That's quite a prophecy. This guy's telling this woman that her baby is going to be dearly loved and dearly hated by a lot of people. And he still is. You bring up Jesus' name in mixed company, there's going to be people that will be offended, if you will. They can start ranting about it. There's other people, it's like we love Jesus. This still happens today. And that last little part about a sword will pierce your own soul too. It's telling her that this is not going to be an easy task. We know from the Gospels that Mary was there present at Jesus' crucifixion. And it's really rough for a parent to lose a child, let alone to see one go that way. It'd be rough. Verse 36. There is also a prophet, Anna, the daughter of Penuel of the tribe of Asher. She was very old. She had lived with her husband 7 years after her marriage, and then was a widow until she was 84.
Only being married for 7 years.
Yeah, and they were married young back then. So she was widowed probably in her early 20s. And she lived alone. The NIV says until she was 84. The wording in the Greek could mean that she lived as a widow for 84 years. So she could be really old. Either way, 84 back then was an old age too. But she decided, instead of being bitter, she decided to devote her life to Christ. And she did a lot of serving in the temple. She never left the temple, but worshiped night and day, fasting and praying. Coming up to them at that very moment, she gave thanks to God and spoke about the child to all who were looking forward to the redemption of Jerusalem. When Joseph and Mary had done everything required by the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee to their own town of Nazareth. And the child grew and became strong. He was filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was on him. One thing you probably should draw out of this is Jesus' birth, his coming, was foretold and talked about by more than just Jesus and his buddies. This isn't something that Jesus and his disciples came up with after he started preaching. There were other people, other witnesses, when he was born, that were testing that he was going to be the Messiah. Verse 41. Every year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. When he was 12 years old, they went up to the festival according to the custom. After the festival was over, while his parents were returning home, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but they were unaware of it. Thinking he was in their company, they traveled on for a day. Then they began looking for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. So we can kind of read that and point fingers and say, you guys, your horrible parents lost track of your kid. Maybe, Mary and Joseph are the same thing. We had one job to take care of the Messiah, and we've lost him. But what was actually going on there is when they would go to these feasts, the whole town would go together. The ladies would travel ahead and set up camp, and the guys would come along later. And being at 12 years old, Jesus could have been with the ladies or the men. Or they could have figured he was just off with his buddies, or his friends, cousins, and stuff, and traveling with them. That's why they both thought he was somewhere else. They didn't realize that he was back in Jerusalem. So after 3 days, they found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. So we kind of refer to him as teaching at this point, but really he's asking questions, but at the same time, that's how the rabbis taught. They taught by asking questions to get your mind thinking. So when his parents saw him, they were astonished. His mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." "Why were you searching for me?" he asked. "Didn't you know I had to be in my father's house?" A quick note on the translation there, because I've always, in my mind, I always picture him saying I had to be about my father's business. So this caused me to stop when I was reading this in the NIV. And I went and searched other translations, and it kept saying father's house, okay? So I get to the King James. The King James says I had to be about my father's business. Like, okay, what's going on here? House and business are two totally different things. So I looked up the original Greek. Neither house nor business is in the original Greek. What's going on there is it's called dropping a word. We do it all the time in our English language, and we don't even think about it. So if I was to say to you, Christy didn't, and just stop there, you're like, didn't do what? But if I say, I came to church this morning and Christy didn't, you can fill in the rest of it. You realize from the context that she didn't come to church. Same thing happens in other languages. You got to understand the context in order to see what words were dropped. And it's really weird. The Greek word, I meant to have that up for you, but I think I closed it out. The Greek words on either side of where they put in house both say the. One is a singular the, one is a plural the. So, yeah, I need to pull it up, Justin. I just said that, people's heads started cocking sideways. Okay. Now, when you're reading this, it's in Greek, so it doesn't read as smoothly as it would if it was in English, right? But he said to them, "Why is it that you are seeking me? Not knew you." So he's saying, didn't you know that, and they translate this as, in the house of the Father of me, it behooved me be. I had to be in my Father's house. The problem is the house in brackets here because the word is not there. This word twice means the. This word two means the. This one is translated as a singular the. So if I hold up the pen, I would use the word two if I was writing about that. I want to talk about the pens, plural, I would use this twice, okay? It has to do with the plurality. So what he's saying, in effect, is you knew basically that these of the Father I had to be about. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So they put it in the context. The reason they put the house is because he's in the temple. So they say, well, that must be what he's talking about. I kind of get the picture of him going, but Mom, you knew I had to be about this. He's kind of holding his arms out with stuff going on. Strange, huh?
So yeah, he's kind of referring to everything that's going on in the temple.
Yeah, what he's doing there is what he has to be about.
He's everything to do with God and the temple and the teachings is what he's referring to.
Yeah, strangely enough, the best translation I found is in the Message. I don't think you'll ever hear me say that again. The Message is a paraphrase. But the way he worded it is, I had to be about the things of my Father. That's the way the Message words it. And I think that's probably a better deal. The house fits. I had to be in my Father's house because if you're in your Father's house, you're basically doing the stuff that your Father wants you to do, right?
The commenters in my Bible are basically saying that Jesus is gently chastising his mother for saying that Joseph is his father.
That is kind of in there. It's kind of implied in there. He's referring to God as being his father. And at the age of 12, the boys should be starting to learn their father's business, right? That's right at the age where either they're going to go on and be trained by a rabbi and go on to like a higher education, or they're going to start learning the family trade. One of the two. He's kind of at that age. So didn't you know I had to be in my father's house? But they did not understand what he was saying to them. Then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. But his mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. So again, we kind of figure that Luke's talking directly to Mary when he's getting this information. How else would he know that Mary treasured these things in her heart? Notice also that Jesus, because I'm trying to keep this focused on Jesus, I have a tendency to slide into history, and I'm sorry, that's who I am.
It's all good.
Yeah, but Jesus, he went down, he was obedient to them. I think the King James might say he was subject to them. But yeah, he was a good kid. He did everything that his parents told him to do.
Yeah, when do you ever hear about that?
Yeah. Especially boys.
Hi, Justin.
Hi, Christian. Hi, Dan.
That old saying, boys will be boys, that comes from somewhere. Since we're on chapter 2, I'm thinking I want to save that for our next get together. We're at noon and we got a meeting to do. So, you guys have any questions on we're in chapter 3. My pages keep flipping on me. You guys have any questions on chapter 2? Okay. Yeah.
Kind of recap what you. Okay, it was Jesus in the temple.
Okay, so yeah, chapter 2. It's basically talking about Jesus as a young boy,
Right.
from his circumcision up to about 12 years old, in the temple. And Luke's the only one that tells us about that. The rest of the guys leave that out. But basically, he lived a normal life. But he lived a sinless life at the same time.
Which was normal for him.
It is normal for him to be sinless, but yeah, not normal for anybody else.
Not normal for a 12-year-old.
No. No, I remember when I was 12. No.
Definitely not when I was 12.
Yeah. Okay, let's go ahead and end that one there.